The global stage feels increasingly tense, doesn't it? And the question of how a nation ensures its own strength, its security, it's just more pressing than ever.
Absolutely.
Today, we're plunging right into that, focusing specifically on the Netherlands,
Right.
our starting point. It's a really compelling YouTube interview. It's titled #14 Defensie Journal Peter Koblenz, Netherlands First.
Ah, yes, with the former director of the MIVD.
Exactly, the Dutch Military Intelligence and Security Service.
So our mission here in this deep dive is basically to distill the key perspectives on Dutch defense and security from that interview.
Navigate the complexities, pull out the core arguments.
Yeah, and give you, the listener, a sharp, comprehensive understanding. Save you maybe an hour or so of watching.
Get the takeaways. And just so everyone's clear, the MIVD is the Netherlands Military Intelligence and Security Service.
Correct.
Okay, let's take this off. We're starting with something pretty direct, a statement from the king himself.
King Willem-Alexander.
He said, and I'm quoting here, "We moeten ons te tot de tanden toe bewapenen."
We must arm ourselves to the teeth. Strong words.
Definitely stirred things up, got applause, but also quite a bit of debate. What did you find most significant there?
Well, what's fascinating is the speaker in the interview, Koblenz, his immediate agreement.
He just backed it straight away.
Pretty much. He framed it as, a fundamental necessity for deterrence.
Right, deterrence, the idea that being strong stops others from attacking.
Exactly. Discouraging potential adversaries. And look, this reflects a growing feeling among European security folks now.
A shift in thinking.
A big shift.
Yeah.
Proactive armament is seen as, well, maybe the best way to deter aggression now, different from the post-Cold War focus on soft power.
And the speaker even mentioned the king's own background.
Yeah, he pointed to the king's experience with frigates, aircraft, suggesting he actually understands the practical needs here.
Interesting. Now, the opposition, some of it seemed to be about whether a monarch should even say things like that, potentially political things.
That was definitely part of it, the constitutional monarch role.
But the counter-argument, which the speaker seemed to lean towards,
is that the king's statement actually lines up with current Dutch defense policy.
which involves more spending, more robust arms anyway.
Precisely.
Huh.
So it wasn't really out of step with the government's direction.
Okay, so if we connect this back to the bigger picture, it's all about deterrence.
That's the core principle.
Right.
Uses that schoolyard analogy, which I think works quite well.
The small kid on the playground.
Yeah. Less likely to get bothered if they're walking with someone who looks strong.
And the mere threat, the appearance of strength, is enough.
Right. It prevents trouble before it starts.
And the speaker's take on the current Dutch military fits this analogy.
He pretty much says it resembles this small, meager little guy right now.
Ouch. So this function, in his view,
Transform into the strong guy through advanced capabilities.
like what specifically?
He mentioned equipping submarines with cruise missiles, missiles capable of reaching Russia,
Wow, okay.
and becoming a leader in AI, cyber resilience, critical areas.
The message being, don't underestimate the Netherlands. Don't think it's an easy target.
Exactly. We shouldn't be taken for granted.
But it's not just about the Netherlands alone, is it? There's NATO.
Crucial point. He rightly emphasizes the added strength from the 30 NATO allies. That's a huge force multiplier.
A collective strength.
Definitely. He even points to Russia's struggles in Ukraine.
Despite Russia having a much bigger army on paper.
Yeah, sheer size isn't everything in modern conflict. Ukraine shows that.
Okay, but surely there are arguments against just ramping up military strength. Did those come up?
Oh yeah, absolutely. He acknowledges the standard concern, the worry about sparking an arms race.
That's always the fear.
And there's also the argument, you often hear it referencing Ukraine, that smaller nations need to be smart rather than just strong, strategically clever.
But the speaker, Koblenz, he wasn't fully convinced by just being smart or relying on help.
He seemed quite skeptical. Yeah, he raised concerns about relying on others. Like, well, financial aid, for instance. It often comes with strings attached, doesn't it?
True.
And essential resources, weapon support.
Yeah.
It can be seriously delayed when a conflict actually breaks out.
So his focus is more on preventing the conflict in the first place.
That's the core. He uses the insurance analogy, like home insurance, liability insurance.
We'll pay for it hoping you never need it.
Exactly. You sincerely hope you won't, but you need the coverage.
So boosting defense spending is like increasing your war insurance premium because the risks nearby seem higher now.
That's pretty much his take, yeah. As threats get closer to Europe.
And he had some pretty blunt words for those who disagree.
He did. He sort of categorized them.
Yeah.
Some are mistaken in their risk assessment, some are maybe apathetic, and some think being strong is somehow provocative in itself.
Okay. Moving on, there's this significant theme about dependency on the U.S., reducing it.
Yes, and it's a nuanced view that comes across.
Yes.
Well, the speaker clearly states the goal for the Netherlands, for Europe really, to be strong enough not to have to rely so heavily on America.
Right, self-reliance.
But at the same time, he expresses a continued, basic trust in the U.S. system.
Even with things Trump said in the past that worried allies.
Yeah, even with that, he mentioned the checks and balances in American democracy as a sort of safeguard.
Okay, so trust but verify, or rather trust but build your own strength just in case.
Exactly. There's a very strong emphasis on European nations needing to collectively build up their own capabilities as a contingency plan.
And he points out Europe's potential strength here.
He does. Larger overall population than the U.S., greater combined defense spending, massive economy.
The potential is there.
Huge potential.
Yeah.
But the critical weakness he identifies.
Let me guess. Lack of unity.
Bingo. No truly unified foreign and defense policy across the EU. That's the bottleneck.
Which leads directly to needing greater European unity on this front.
Essential, he argues, for proper burden sharing, stronger security agreements within Europe itself.
Okay, let's talk specifically about the concerns around former President Trump and NATO. Article 5 obviously comes up.
It has to. For listeners, Article 5 is the heart of NATO. An attack on one is an attack on all. Collective defense.
And Trump questioning that commitment, that caused serious unease.
Understandably so. The speaker points out that the erosion of confidence in Article 5 during Trump's first term was, frankly, dangerous.
But he also saw a sort of unexpected upside.
Well, maybe upside is too strong, but he acknowledged a positive consequence. Trump's pressure did lead to increased defense spending by several NATO members.
So his pushing worked, in a way, even if the rhetoric was harsh.
It's complex, isn't it? The speaker notes Trump's narrative, portraying allies as constantly cheating the U.S.
Right.
But the underlying message that European nations need to take more responsibility, be able to act alone if needed, that clearly resonates with the speaker.
Which brings us to the idea of the Netherlands maybe hosting a NATO summit. There was debate about that, the disruption it might cause.
Yes, but the speaker, Koblenz, he's firmly in favor.
Why?
He highlights the Netherlands' organizational skills, the financial ability to host, and importantly, the symbolic value, showing commitment.
Sending a message.
Exactly. He's also critical of NATO nations that still aren't meeting their spending targets. Hosting is seen as a trust-building measure.
And practical advantages for the Netherlands hosting.
Yeah, things like good digital infrastructure, relatively small size, making coordination maybe easier.
He acknowledges the strain on police resources, though.
Oh, yes, definitely. But he sees it as a necessary trade-off for the bigger strategic benefits.
What about the uncertainty around Trump potentially not attending such a summit if he were president again?
That came up too. The speaker views his potential absence mainly as a political signal.
Signaling what?
Possibly signaling that NATO is less important to a second Trump administration.
Though advisors might try to persuade him to go.
Possibly. But there was also a slightly cynical suggestion that his absence might mean fewer foolish remarks, as the speaker put it. Fewer unpredictable moments.
Okay, quite direct. Let's broaden out then to the assessment of Trump's foreign policy overall, as seen in this interview.
There's definite skepticism expressed about whether Trump really listens to expert advice, especially if it differs from his own views.
Right.
The departure of his former national security advisor, Mike Waltz, was mentioned as surprising in that context.
And the results of his first term.
The speaker points to a lack of major progress on key promises, like peace in Ukraine, new trade deals with China.
Things that didn't really happen.
Right. And this is seen as creating uncertainty, instability, especially the failure to resolve the Ukraine conflict back then.
Okay, now the discussion took a specific and frankly quite concerning turn towards Trump and Ukraine's resources.
Yes, this was about a reported conversation between Trump and Zelensky, supposedly near the Vatican.
What was it about?
An agreement related to Ukraine's raw materials. Trump reportedly claimed he controlled most of these resources in the Russian-occupied areas.
He claimed he controlled them.
Effectively, yes. And even suggested offering that area, those resources, to the U.S.
Wow. The speaker saw this as
deeply opportunistic, not a genuine security guarantee for Ukraine at all.
And the reported conditions for Ukraine, no NATO membership, giving up territory.
Seen as completely unacceptable. The speaker really emphasized the huge human cost of ceding territory.
Millions of Ukrainians under Russian rule.
Exactly. And the disrespect of those who fought and died defending it? Unthinkable.
This grim picture leads into the assessment of the war itself, the stalemate.
Yes. The speaker's view is stark. Neither Russia nor Ukraine can achieve a decisive military win right now.
Just grind it on.
A devastating war of attrition. Trench warfare, massive casualties, especially on the Russian side daily, and a lost generation of Ukrainian men.
It's just not sustainable for either side in the long run.
Fundamentally unsustainable. There's also worry about Odessa, Ukraine, being cut off from the Black Sea.
Which would affect the link between Crimea and Transnistria.
Yes, that whole land bridge calculation. The speaker is also critical of the U.S. strategy, or what he sees as the strategy of trying to peel Russia away from China. He thinks that's unrealistic.
And Russia's stance in any potential talks?
No sign of meaningful concessions, apparently.
So the expectation is more of the same for years.
Pretty much. Dragging on until one side is exhausted, or maybe a leadership change in Ukraine happens.
And the big danger is the U.S. pulling back support.
That's seen as playing right into Putin's hands, allowing him to wait it out.
But Europe is still making commitments.
Yes. The speaker reaffirms the EU membership promise for Ukraine, the Article 41 Mutual Assistance Clause.
But the underlying message is Europe needs to be ready to manage things itself.
Strongly. Prepare for a NATO- scenario, as he puts it, where the U.S. isn't the main player.
Maybe closer ties between Canada and the EU could help there.
That's mentioned as a possibility. But the crucial lesson, hammered home, is Europe must get stronger collectively.
Okay, let's bring it back home then. Netherlands first. How does the speaker see this being put into practice? What are the priorities?
Fundamentally, it's about meeting existing obligations, doing what we've agreed to do.
And focusing resources.
Yes, prioritizing areas where the Netherlands is already strong or can be. Cyber capabilities are a prime example.
More collaboration needed there, between industry and government.
Critically needed. He acknowledges progress but wants more urgency. Focus on what the Netherlands can directly control and influence.
And communication to the public.
Also key. Deterrence needs clear communication. He mentioned the EK feeling, that national unity during big football tournaments.
Harnessing that kind of feeling. Hands off our country.
Something like that. Projecting unity and resolve. The ideal outcome, of course, is credible deterrence preventing any conflict.
And public opinion seems to have shifted on this, compared to, say, 30 years ago.
Oh, massively. He contrasts it with the disarmament movement back then, removing cruise missiles.
And now?
Now, the Dutch Navy just launched its first cruise missile. That's a huge symbolic shift.
He mentioned past resistance in Parliament to offensive weapons.
Yes, in his long-standing argument that, well, whether you're hit by an offensive or defensive weapon, the result isn't great either way. He's always pushed for a strong deterrent.
Even using that phrase about having the capability to flatten the Kremlin. Figuratively, of course.
Figuratively, yes.
Yeah.
But the point is being taken seriously, as a nation that can defend itself and contribute meaningfully.
A major vulnerability highlighted is critical infrastructure. Ports, especially.
Yes. Rotterdam is named as an immediate high-value target. The threat is real.
So, much more security needed there.
Urgently. And he notes a shift in thinking. It's not just about missile belts in Germany anymore.
Piece of drones.
Exactly. Drones change the game. Defense needs to be much closer to home, protecting domestic sites. Ports, the digital hubs in Amsterdam.
And the Netherlands' small size makes it more vulnerable.
Disproportionately so. An attack on those key hubs could have a massive impact.
Okay, let's talk about the MIVD's annual report. The new head, Peter Racing.
Right. And his quote, Russia is becoming increasingly audacious. They are increasingly seeking out the boundaries.
What does that mean in practice? Audacious how?
The speaker clarifies. It refers to things like the sabotage uncovered in Germany attributed to Russia, and constant, ongoing cyber probing, attempted intrusions.
So hybrid warfare, not just tanks.
Precisely. Computer takeovers, data theft, espionage. These are the ongoing battles, often unseen by the public until something big happens.
And the MIVD's role now is to make people aware of this, more than before.
Seems so. A shift from perhaps being more cautious before the Ukraine invasion. Now, with the changed landscape, raising public awareness is crucial.
Which leads to the debate about offensive cyber capabilities.
Yes. If someone like Russia could shut down the Dutch power grid via cyber attack, what's the response?
And the speaker's position.
He's a very strong advocate for the Netherlands, developing its own offensive cyber power. Skilled hackers, tools to disrupt adversaries.
He sees advantages for the Netherlands here.
Definitely. Top talent, leading chip companies like ASML, quantum technology potential.
But frustration with bureaucracy, things moving too slowly.
Some frustration there, yes. Getting things done quickly in this domain can be challenging. And quantum computing, just briefly for listeners, it's still developing but could break current encryption, making it vital for future security.
The MIVD report called 2024 a potential tipping point for Russian sabotage attempts. Any specifics?
No specific targets were named publicly, but there was speculation. Sea cables, the main harbor, utilities. One company, Vetus, apparently took extra precautions.
It highlights that tension, doesn't it? Secrecy versus transparency.
Absolutely. You can't tell the public everything because you might inadvertently help the adversary, reveal what worked or what didn't.
The speaker mentioned a Dutch tendency to maybe overshare sometimes.
He did suggest that. Yeah. Finding the right balance is tricky. Maintaining public trust in agencies like MIVD is vital.
Does he think trust in the military has declined?
No, he actually disagrees with that. He thinks public respect for the armed forces has increased.
And he dismisses criticism from some old generals.
Yeah, suggests they might be focused on outdated warfare models. He points to Ukraine. Again, improvisation was needed, but the lack of preparedness had a high human cost.
The core message being, we have to accept some actors just have bad intentions.
Pretty much. It's like locking your door at night. You take precautions against theft. Why not for national security?
Okay, so why is the Netherlands specifically a target for Russia?
Several reasons cited. Strong support for Ukraine, obviously.
Yeah.
The presence of the International Criminal Court in The Hague.
Though the speaker downplays the ICC factor a bit.
Yeah, because major players like Russia, the U.S., Israel, aren't members. He sees other factors as more critical.
Such as?
Strategic location in Europe, the big transatlantic digital hubs in Amsterdam, the port of Rotterdam, vital assets.
And the potential damage if those were hit.
He paints a stark picture. Could be catastrophic, potentially half the country affected in a severe scenario. Need to take it seriously, secure these places.
He even mentions specific tactics Russia might use in a wider NATO conflict.
Yeah, things like targeting the hinterland, disrupting ports, disabling key roads like the A27 highway, basically trying to make the Netherlands an Achilles heel for Europe.
Because everything is so interconnected.
Exactly. And he notes the U.S. preference to keep conflicts away from its own soil, making Europe the potential theater.
But despite the risks, he thinks the ICC should stay in the Netherlands.
Firmly, yes. As a matter of principle, national pride. Accept the dangers that come with it.
The conversation also touched on that dark gray area between war and peace.
Yes, a phrase that initially got some pushback, but seems more accepted now.
The speaker thinks it's an accurate description.
He does, especially looking at Putin's actions, unwillingness to concede anything in Ukraine, even ramping things up around potential talks.
Expectation of long negotiations tied to U.S. politics.
Right. And the danger of just waiting for external factors to fix things. The Netherlands needs to ensure its own security, avoid Ukraine's fate.
And his assessment is the intelligence warnings are even more serious than publicly stated.
That's the implication. What the defense minister says publicly might be a moderated version of what the intelligence services are really saying.
So what's the most immediate threat, then? Cyber. Physical attack.
The emphasis is definitely on the ongoing pervasive cyber threat.
The stuff that can cause major disruption, power outages, data breaches, often without people realizing it's an attack.
Exactly. That's happening now. The risk of, say, borders being crossed or ports being bombed is less immediate, but still a potential threat that needs guarding against.
Did the interview touch on personal cybersecurity much?
Briefly. The speaker said he hasn't been a direct victim but takes precautions. There was a lighthearted bit about not sharing PI nodes.
Right.
But it highlighted that tension again.
Yeah.
Personal privacy versus national security needs.
He thinks privacy concerns sometimes hinder intelligence gathering.
He made that point, yeah. Using the follow money example, if privacy rules block tracking financial flows, it can impede investigations.
And he reflected on how views on personal data have changed, compared to old phone books, for instance.
Yeah, a different era.
He also believes citizens have a personal responsibility for national security.
Strongly. Even supports mandatory voting to boost civic engagement. He wants more decisive action, less endless discussion.
What about conscription? Reinstating it?
He supports reactivating some form if volunteer reserves aren't enough.
So the public should know large-scale mobilization is a possibility.
Yes, and integrate it with volunteer service, other recruitment pathways.
Okay, intelligence cooperation in Europe. Important, obviously.
Crucial. But he pushes back hard on the idea that the Netherlands is blind without the U.S.
Emphasizing Dutch capabilities.
Absolutely. Built up over years. He stresses you can't always trust Allied intelligence completely anyway. Different agendas, reliability issues.
Prioritize your own sources first.
Yes. And work towards more independence, like through satellite capabilities. Verify everything from multiple sources.
And the MEVD director's view on trust with the U.S. services.
Basically, trust exists, but the level and intensity of cooperation needs constant work, constant attention.
Information is the raw material, need diverse, validated sources. Partner info is useful, but not the only source.
Exactly.
Who are the main cyber threats identified?
The usual suspects: Russia, North Korea, China, Iran.
He didn't call them an axis of evil, though.
No, he avoided labels like that.
Hmm.
Acknowledged the complexity as it state-sponsored hackers, individuals.
Hmm.
But the defense needs to be robust regardless.
And the Netherlands has its own offensive cyber tools as a deterrent.
Confirmed, yes.
What about espionage? Intellectual property theft.
China is highlighted as a major player there, acquiring knowledge, stealing IP, often through long-term infiltration. Countermeasures are essential.
The interview also addressed extremism within defense and the civil service.
Yes, acknowledge the issue. Defense personnel in right-wing extremist networks, distinct from general conspiracy stuff.
Historical parallels with Baikal gangs mentioned.
Right. And defense efforts to vet recruits, identify extremist links, left or right, address changes in behavior after hiring, too.
The risk is infiltration in key spots. MIVD, civil service.
Yes, individuals slipping through screening or good at deception, contrasted with the private sector where background checks are much less common.
Even though basic checks aren't that expensive or difficult.
Surprisingly affordable, yeah.
So ongoing checks are needed, not just at hiring.
Absolutely. Continuous accountability, ensure people remain suitable, no risk to the organization or society.
And finally, collaboration between intelligence and business, increasingly important.
Especially for critical industries. He mentioned the update due diligence system, security protocols, audits for companies working with defense.
Expected that most companies in the growing defense sector will need to meet these standards.
That's the expectation. And maybe more awareness of affordable background checks could help across the board.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, several key takeaways. A clear, urgent need for strong Dutch defense.
In a complex, unpredictable world, yeah.
The nature of threats is evolving fast. Cyber is central now.
Alongside traditional concerns, absolutely.
And national resilience, meeting obligations, focusing on strengths. That's the Netherlands' first idea in practice.
Responsible practice, yeah. Fulfilling your part.
It leaves us with a pretty big question for you, our listener, doesn't it?
It does. In this changing, uncertain world, what's the individual's role in national security today?
How do we balance personal freedoms with collective safety?
And what does being truly prepared actually mean in the 21st century? Something to think about.